And so I'm just going to let Carrie introduce herself and then our two speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carrie Kissel, one of the associate directors at NATO, working on research and training around rural transportation and economic development. We're really excited that you've all joined us today for this Tribal Transportation Peer Exchange. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Michelle and Warren for being willing to share your stories, and thanks to all of you for joining in us in this discussion today. Please feel free to pipe up with questions throughout. Really look forward to engaging with you. If you have any problems Zoom-wise, you can chat me in Zoom and I'll do my best to try to fix things. I also will pop some links in the chat throughout our conversation today to some additional resources and other events that we're aware of that are coming up. So thank you so much. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
And just a caveat to that, if any questions come up while the speakers are talking and while we are asking them questions during the initial portion, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We will grab them. We have a document where we put all those kind of questions in, and we will make sure to get to it when we get to the Q&A portion. And when the Q&A portion comes up, feel free to raise your hands and you can ask it and come off mute. So I'm going to pass it to Michelle to introduce herself. And then once Michelle introduces herself, we can pass it to Warren, and then we can deep dive into the questions.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle Smith, and I am the transit manager for the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribal Transit. We are located about 45 miles northeast of Reno, if you're familiar where Reno is in northern Nevada. And I've been a transit manager here since 2019. So I'm still learning, and it's a great field to be in. I love transit, and I'm glad to be here to be of any assistance and share my story with you about how we got our transit facility going. So welcome.
And Warren, you're up.
Well, I'm always nervous when we get into these, but my name is Warren Blackman. I am the Blackfeet Transit Director for the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. We are located pretty much on the upper Canadian border. We border basically Glacier National Park. We just completed, oh gosh, off the top of my head, I want to say just over 5,000 square feet of new construction that we had, and we've completed just in the last few months. I did want to point out, and just to throw this out there, that I joined transit right during COVID in 2021. We have significantly made changes. And the part I always giggle about is transit is such a unique world that you have to kind of join it to start understanding some of the language in there. And so I've been lucky enough to be able to network and learn a lot. Because of that, we just recently had our Montana Transit Association meeting, and the Blackfeet Transit, for the first time in program history, was named Transit of the Year for the state of Montana.
Oh, nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. And then Michelle and Warren, you guys ready to jump in?
You bet.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we already did a little bit of this, but can you guys tell us about your project? Just kind of like the basics of it, and then we'll get into more details as we go along.
Okay. Should I go
And
first or?
yeah, we'll start with Michelle and then go to Warren. We'll
Okay.
do alphabetical
Okay.
order by first name.
So our story is similar to Warren's as far as getting our project up and running, and it just so happened to be during the time of COVID also. So we found a lot of challenges. Um, we were awarded a bus facilities grant. It was a competitive grant, and uh, the funds that we were awarded, long story short, we wasn't going to be enough to complete the project. So we had to get creative and we had to go out looking for more funding. Um, but all in all, we started the project in well, we got the award in 2018. And then it just took so time. And then we had some changes with staff. And when I became the transit manager, I basically was handed the baton to get that project going and started. So the best thing that I could do was work very, very closely with my tribal liaison at FTA, which was she had so much uh, knowledge about, especially construction projects and grant compliance and all of that good stuff. But we were able to start our project in 2021 after, we the steps that we had to take as far as getting a construction company, getting the building design, which was a separate grant in itself. And then uh, uh, once we got the RFP and our construction companies signed on, um, we got our project manager and just let him have it. And here we are, and a few years later, and we just moved into our building in 2025. So we've been here for about a year, and it still feels very new to us. But we're excited. Warren mentioned something that they're really happy to have their building, and we are too, because where we came from, we have, at the time we had two bus routes, and we had two buses, and we had four drivers, regular drivers, and a dispatcher and myself. So we're small, we're small transit. But we've grown since. We've added another route, added another bus. And so, like I said, our challenge was not having enough funding. So what I did was um, all the apportionment funds that we normally get after, after our NTD reporting, we turned our apportionment funding into construction projects and just changed the scope on that. And then we just continued to put in for more competitive grants. So we got our all of our money together, and then we were able to get the project up and running and fully funded. And so because of the funding, lack of funding, we had to um, separate our projects because in the beginning, we had our facility, and then we had a bus shed that we wanted to have in the whole project. So we had to separate them into phases. So um, we are we have a bus shed project that's near completion that will house five buses because we were able to buy some more, purchase more buses. And so we're totally not in the place that we were when we first started our transit program. So we're excited and we're growing and we're meeting the needs of the community. We've outed routes and we run a deviated fixed route system here.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Warren, you're up.
So our challenges were the same. And it shows you how new I was when we initially decided to apply for grant funding. I think everyone's familiar with the Tribal Transit Competitive Grant that comes out every year.
Hmm.
I naively put in the funding for that, of course, was declined. But the good part was I learned a lot from that. And then actually went out and found the facilities grant the next year. So we in 22 put in for that grant. What we did to help us, since it was new, is that we spent some of our apportionment funds to hire a um, gentleman to sketch out the building and to basically give us an estimate. So we knew what the grant funds were to ask for. And then when we did do the grant, I actually asked for 20% more based on when the grant funds arrived to construction time, I knew costs would go up. Even with those, at the end of the day, we were still short of $500,000. And the problems that we ran into, which I don't know if a lot of you have what we call our tribal tarot rights here, And so for an outside contractor to come to the reservation, sovereign immunity and all of these things came into play. Well, since it's federal funds, we had to be bonded. So
Mhm.
with him, we could not come to a resolution between sovereign immunity and the bonding company. So he ended up having to drop out of the project, which we then went to another bidder. The cost significantly went up. And so we were lucky enough that we actually reached out to the state of Montana because we have a good relationship with them. And we were able to get a an additional $500,000 with 80% from the state and another 20% match from the tribe to come up with the funds. But even with those funds along the way, you definitely will run into some challenges that you didn't anticipate. And so, but we are also a small transit. To give you an idea, I think when we started in 2021, we used to drive about 40,000 miles and we served about 4,200 people. Um, we now hit tier two finally. And so we now serve about 22,000 people, and we drove this past year 207,000 miles for the year. So basically, if you look at the math, we're doing about 5 times more than we ever used to help the community too. And so we were able to use our CRISA funds with the COVID monies and purchased 4 buses that way. Did another grant for another buses. So we went from 5 buses, we're now up to about 15. So we significantly needed the building. The original building was built in 2007. And so it was initially built for 3 vehicles. And now I think we can fit about 20 if we get creative.
Oh, wow.
And so we're rapidly using up all the space we just built.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
What
I
a
was
success story.
about to
and
say
then
that's truly amazing.
one thing
Yeah.
that we did do, and I don't know if you faced those challenges, Michelle, but we dedicated certain spaces to vehicle maintenance. So we bought our own lift. And so we do our own oil changes and tire changes and brake work and all those
Yeah.
types of things here because the nearest facility that can do that work is about 40 miles away.
Hmm.
We have mechanics, and so we have those challenges. So part of our expansion was also to be able to have a maintenance bay. So now
Mm.
we can do all that stuff in-house now,
Okay.
which significantly reduces our maintenance costs.
Yeah, so we always outsourced our maintenance to Reno because we're pretty close to
Right.
Reno. But I because of the environmental um part of having to do that, having your own maintenance
Right.
within that, we didn't want to tackle that right away, right now. So
Well,
that's something in the future that we are
well,
looking at doing. So it's not
here,
out of the picture, but just not right now.
Here's what we did to get around it. We have a gentleman that, of course, being Montana, where winters are pretty severe. We
Mhm.
found a gentleman that actually his shop furnace, their building furnace runs off used engine oil.
Mm.
So he provides a pallet for us, and we got a big old container. So all of that used material goes into that. He just basically comes and picks it up. He uses it for his fuel, and then just provides us a new tote. So I've
Oh,
simplified it
okay.
because I do understand what you're talking about
Yeah,
because
because we were told we had to have a grease trap for
right.
that. Hmm.
And so we just have our big catch can that we have for all that. So all our floors, I mean, it's sealed, and so there's no environmental issues now that we
Hmm.
can foresee. So even if there is a spill, it's all contained on our floor, which we can
Oh, yeah.
actually sop up and stuff. So we were able to get around that. So
Oh, good,
yep.
good.
But I'll give you an idea. We recently had a transmission go out. Ford, I think, wanted like $11,000. We got it done for $3,700.
Oh, that really
And we
cut.
got it done a lot faster than they did. So,
Mhm.
Mhm.
Oh, good, good.
yep,
Yeah, because you didn't have to wait in line.
yep, there you go. Exactly.
You so you both mentioned apportionment funds, and as someone who is relatively new to transportation like myself, can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so when every year, well, our apportionment comes from the tribal transit fund. So we report to the National Transit Database every year, and we report our miles, our hours, and our unlinked trans passenger trips. And then The NTD calculates our miles, and then they in turn reimburse us for those miles that we've driven. So it's like the more miles that you drive, the more funds that you're going to get at the in the next year,
Yep.
next fiscal year. So we are looking at getting up to tier two also
Yep.
next year because of our third route that we added this past year.
Yep.
So
And what exactly are those tiers?
do you want to explain that, Warren?
Yep. So, when we come into transit, you have to understand the dollars, and it took me a couple years to I understood the tiers, but essentially, if you go look on the apportionments that just came out, you'll see they're broken in three tiers. Tier one is based on the mileage that you report. Okay. They have a little formula that they use, and I think I figured it out like 92 cents for every mile you drive. So based on the number of miles that you drive, you get an X amount of dollars. Tier three is based on your passenger count, and there's some other details that go in there, but essentially, based on the community that you serve or the number of passengers that you serve, there's also a calculation given in. So they take those $2 and they combine them. So when I started, for instance, our federal apportionment was about $160,000. What I didn't understand at the time, because I wanted to serve the people, so we went from that 4,000 passenger count up to 15,000, which I thought was great. But when it came to the apportionment dollars, we saw about a $22,000 increase in our apportionment. And so really you have to examine tier two. Now what tier two does, and it's pretty simple, for all tribal transits that drive over 200,000 miles, you get approximately 200, for this year was about $290,000 in additional funding. So we now are funded at about 680,000 per year from just the FTA travel transit formula. But it took me a little while to figure that out. And so the problem is that when you report that data, so our funding for FY26 is based on your FY24 data. So knowing that we hit it in 24, I know we hit it in 25. So our funding significantly is going to go up by about a $500,000, if not a little bit more, just in 2 years. And so we can start expanding transits better. But it took a while to figure out how does the funding work.
Mhm.
And not a lot of people were familiar with that until you start understanding it. But if you really break it down if you just type in FTA allocation, it'll break down all your allocations for you. And so the ones to reach out to are the ones that are on tier two because they finally figured it out. So
Awesome, thank you. To get back to the specific projects, how did you two go about identifying the needs for these projects? What kind of came up and how did you go about like starting?
Well, for us, when we first started, I'll go way back to the transit manager that started before me. His name's Robert. I wish he could have been on this panel
oh,
today, but because he's moved on to a different tribe and is starting a new transit system there. But he's the guy that's handed me the baton. So when Robert first started transit, our transit system was on the long range transportation plan with our transportation planner. And so this was in thought process in uh, the year 2012. And I don't know if you're familiar with CTAA, that program. They're the ones that help develop our transit system. So when Robert was hired on as a new transit manager, there wasn't even an office. He was working out of his pickup truck with a laptop and just getting started. And I so happened to be working in another department temporarily, and he said, "Michelle, do you want to come over and help me start this transit program?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So him and I got office space into a modular that, and we were sharing with another department, and the space was just very cramped, and but it was okay because it was just him and I. So we just started getting stuff organized and getting familiar with how transit operation works. Because there weren't in Nevada, there were at the time, we were only the second um, transit in as far as in Indian country goes, because there's rural transit through the state of Nevada, NDOT, and so we uh, we planted ourselves in this modular and then started hiring, developing job descriptions for transit operators, a dispatcher, and creating the job. So I did my part and helped him get it started. And then I had moved away to California for a little bit. And then when I came back to Nevada, he had the job opening. And so I started out as a transit specialist, basically, because my background was mainly in like program assistant, executive assistant type work. I worked for the state of Nevada and whatnot. But so we got transit up and running, got the operators going, and then a few years down the road, uh, we were really cramped up in this modular, and there was no space, there was no area for our drivers to, when we had shift change, there was nowhere for them to really sit, and but we made it work. You know, you do what you got to do to just make the program work. And then the opportunity came to apply for a competitive bus and bus facilities grant, and that's how it all started. And that was in 2018. And
Amazing.
the transit our transit program started in we actually got drivers on the road in 2015. So it was a few years of living in close quarters before we actually got into a facility, the works of planning a facility.
Understandable.
Yeah, and now we're the first tribe in the state of Nevada to have a facility, and we're
That's
really
amazing.
we're really honored for that. But to go back a little bit ways, we are a subrecipient of NDOT for our main operational expenses, and so the apportionments that come in we can put towards the facility, towards our buses, our bus purchases, and then utilize our funds through the state of Nevada DOT to operate with, like our salaries and all that. So, like I said, you got to be creative with your funding and figure out what you're going to use to sustain your program. So that's why we decided to continue to be subrecipients of this of NDOT, so then we can concentrate on using our apportionment funds for those other big expenses like fuel. Fuel's another thing. You never know how high it's going to be and how low it's going to be. You know, it fluctuates. So that's one thing that I would highly recommend is determine what your priority is as far as your funding goes and where your needs are gonna be met best.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
Warren, you're up.
I think pretty much all the transits have a need for a building or updated facilities. I think our transit started in 76, and for a long time they were just in a pretty decrepit building. And so whoever the transit manager was in 2007 got the facility built. But of course they ran out of funds. So um, right away, what my worry was is with having some of the buses parked outside, I was worried about vandalism. Um, because some of these parts are expensive and they're not available through your normal dealer connections. And so that became the big issue. My poor drivers used to have to sit out in the bay in really warm clothes, waiting for the ride if they were. So just the challenges of securing buses and getting enough room for the things we wanted to do um, became it. And I like how you brought that up, Michelle, is that we're also with Montana Department of Transportation. And so I don't know if yours is broken down like ours, but our operating expenses are a 54% match and 46% match. Our maintenance and administration is an 80-20 match. So you have to be very, very calculating with those dollars because
Hmm.
the great part about the federal allocation, that's 100%.
Hmm.
So you have to be really careful how you manage your dollars.
Yes.
Um, you brought me back to the fuel program because their fuel program was pretty bad. And so we have a fuel program now. And so now that we're driving miles, we actually get a bigger discount from the fuel. And so,
Oh.
yeah, so we started out. But now the drivers, I mean, fuel used to be always be the issue, and now it's just the day-to-day expense. When they needed a fuel card, they just take the fuel. And of course, we have the security guidelines. But of course, I think most tribal transits, need facilities. And I would just tell everybody, just please reach out. There's so much help. And the last thing, Michelle, you touched on, I cannot give enough thanks to our FTA liaison at that time. Her name was Ebony, and she was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely wonderful. So do not be scared to reach out because those people are very, very knowledgeable and are more
Hmm.
willing to help you. And without them, we couldn't have got where we're at. So,
Yeah, I totally agree. Our liaison had 30 years
yeah.
FTA experience, and she finally retired. And I really miss her because it's like we had such a good relationship where we can just pick up the phone, and even if you think your question is um, insignificant, don't be afraid to reach out because they do have that expertise that can help you, especially with the application process because
Right.
that can be a little tricky and uh, so it's really important to get close to your tribal liaison at
Yep.
that level.
Yep.
Amazing. Thank you both. And as a quick follow-up question, specifically to something that you said, Michelle, but also you, Warren, talking about CCAA and the tribal liaisons, how can other people access those resources from both? I know you mentioned just like making sure to reach out to your tribal liaison and build a relationship with them, but how can others go about accessing resources like those to help either design their transit program or help with funding?
Well, I think the best thing to do would go to their website, CT Community Transportation Association of America. That's what CTAA. And another great resource I have to give a shout out to is National RTAP. And they have a plethora of information for tribal transits. I actually got selected to be a part of the review board last year, so I'm looking forward to working closely with that group and helping our tribal transits is with training and whatnot. And I think we're going to start doing more construction project sessions and training for that too, and giving more resources out to tribal transits. So RTAP is another resource to tap into.
So you heard it here first, folks. Michelle's on the review board now, so find her address and send all the gift baskets.
Yeah.
And then Warren, how
I
about
love
you?
coffee. No.
And coffee, and coffee.
I'll just second that. I was lucky enough that within a few months of me arriving at Transit, I met Neil at
Yes.
RTAP. And
Yes.
so
Neil's a great, great resource.
he is absolutely wonderful. And so I was lucky enough to, start taking advantage. But just to highlight the best thing is do not be afraid to go to some of these national conferences because there
Mhm.
are very knowledgeable people.
Mhm.
Because I found every transit is different. What
Yes.
works for the Blackfeet Transit may not necessarily work for the other tribal transits in the state of Montana.
Mhm.
But the best thing is just reach out to everybody, and so you can take bits and pieces from each tribal transit and kind of bring it into your own. And
Mhm.
so, but the best thing I can tell you is network, go to the conferences. I don't know if like we just was last week was at our MTA Montana Transit Association conference. So we work with a ton of different people, very knowledgeable group. But if you do not ask the question, you're never going to get that answer. And so again, just to ask whatever basic question is the only dumb question is the one that you don't ask.
They
So
don't ask.
is what
Yeah.
I say. So just make sure you reach out. Um, there's tons and tons of resources to get whatever issue you have um, resolved.
Another thing that I would like to add, it's kind of off the beat, but if you're ever in a situation where your tribal transit is selected for technical assistance, take it.
Yeah.
Because every single time that we've ever been selected, or if, even if there was like maybe a red flag or you had some issues that came up with your grant, um, take it with, in a positive way to where you're going to improve your program. You're going to gain that networking system with people and but take advantage of any type of technical assistance that comes up, falls on your lap. Do it.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for that. And then, um, because we're kind of talking about partnerships here, this is a good question to come to next. How can those outside the tribe, like the economic development districts in attendance today or RTPOs, be better partners for projects like this and just for transit projects in general with their local tribes, especially considering if like tribal transit might maybe like cross over into the EDD's territory, or if like the EDD's programs cross over into tribal territory for any reason. How can they be better partners for y'all?
I'll tell you the thing that we've kind of seen is, to be perfectly honest with you, with ours locally, they've never reached out to us in 5 years. So I would tell you that I know some of the surrounding communities outside the reservation, a lot of them are reluctant to reach out. But again, um, I would say just to go meet the people that you need to meet, and you'd be surprised that the person that you thought was in charge of something is actually not the person that you should be talking to. So my only thing is just to have them reach out to the tribal transits directly and set up those one-on meetings. Basically, just develop a relationship because we don't have a relationship with our local development companies here,
Yeah.
or from a transit standpoint anyway.
Yeah. Same here. Um, Another thing that people, when they see our buses, they see Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribal Transit, and they think it's only just for tribal members, not knowing that we receive federal funding and we're a public transportation system. And so, one thing that we're trying to do is try to get the word out, you like using social media and letting people know we're here, uh, to help with transportation because we have three buses. We have a local bus, we have a lake bus that's really helps the people on the reservation get to Reno, and then we have a Reno bus which goes back and forth from the reservation to Reno. And then our local bus goes from the reservation to the next closest town, which is like 3 miles away from one of our communities. So um, just getting that word out and we haven't really done any partnership. The only partnership that I've really done on the outside is with our veterans because we're looking at trying to serve the veterans and getting them to like the veterans, the VA hospital or whatnot. But then because we're looking at doing a hybrid service at one point, maybe doing on demand to help with the veterans and the elders. But right now, we don't have anybody approaching us like on the outside. So other than other tribes looking to get information on how we got our program started or how exactly what we're doing today. Sharing,
Amazing. Thank you.
sharing.
And as Carrie just said, one of our colleagues is actually getting ready to speak at CTAA's Expo today about that misconception of general public not being able to use tribal transit. So very, very timely to bring that up, Michelle.
Mhm.
And then, in the interest of time, I'm going to combine two questions into one. So, what was the biggest barrier for your guys' projects? And then, if you could give like one piece of advice at each step of the life cycle of those projects, what would that advice be?
I think the barrier is always funding.
Yeah.
That's fair.
And then The second issue is okay, well, how much money do I need to accomplish what we want? And so I think our path was just simply to hire an architect to come up with a rough outline of the building and establish a budget. Biggest barriers were I ended up being the construction project manager, so that was a learning curve in itself. Um, a lot of the barriers, I mean, you got to learn about NEPA, and I'm trying to remember what the acronym was, but you got basically your environmental findings. Luckily, we're right next door to our environmental department, so that ended up being a lot easier than I anticipated. But I think the biggest barrier is where do you start and establishing a budget for your project. I think the other barrier that luckily I did not have is land. I think that's the biggest barrier that the FTA is going to look at is do you have somewhere to put it and are you able to build right away? So I know those were some big questions that we had to answer from them. So
Awesome. And then what would be your biggest pieces of advice for like the beginning of the project, kind of the construction phase, and then wrapping the project up?
for us, we hired. So what we did is normally people put out what they call RFPs, request for proposal. I was going to tell you the FTA has some project guidelines that I used bits and pieces out of it. And so you can Google that and they'll give you some project guidelines. And so what we did is we went with what we called an RFQ process. So rather than bid based on price, we bid based on qualification. So when we did the architect, I leaned heavily on someone that was going to help me walk this project from the beginning to end. And so we relied heavily on our architect to ensure our construction processes and schedules were met. So that's the biggest thing I think that you can do is find someone that's willingly going to work with you from step one to step 100.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we'll pass the question over to Michelle.
And for us, it's pretty much the same too. It comes down to funding and making sure that you have enough. I think the first thing that we did was it started in the very beginning in the design process and working closely with our architects, the ones that were chosen to help with the construction project. And then uh, we were good with land because we have a big land base also, but also we had to look at is the infrastructure going to be able to handle um being built on the community as far as like water pressure, and that's one thing that was another barrier that we came across because um that's not just the it wasn't an issue just with the new building, but in the whole community. So that's something that brought to light to our tribe is something they need to look into the future is upgrading the like the water system to handle the growth in the community. So that was one thing. NEPA wasn't too bad. It wasn't too much of a barrier for us. We worked closely with our FTA liaison that FTA has NEPA people that have the expertise in letting you know what you need to have in line. And then, of course, when you're building on a reservation, you've got to include your TIPO person, your tribal preservation. So those those individuals have to be on site when you break ground on the reservation. So those are some of the things that are you need to consider if you're building on tribal land. And then, like Warren said, we just worked really closely with our architects and um, really heavily relied on their expertise on making sure that we construct a really good building. And it's so funny because we're the newest structure in our community. We're made up of three communities. We have Wadsworth, Nixon, and Sutcliffe. And Nixon is our our headquarters for the tribe. So this is where our facility is located in Nixon, Nevada. And when the architects built the building, it's the strongest it can withhold. I forgot what the magnitude of earthquakes are, but we've been having earthquakes lately. And one time there was a semi-big earthquake. I think it was like in the fives, but everybody was getting on social media and they said there was an earthquake, and we were like, we didn't feel anything because our building was so strongly made. So um, for that, we're thankful. But like Warren said, working close with your architects is really key. I would recommend that you do that.
Awesome. And then just one last question, then we'll get into Q&A from the audience. Um, can you talk, being funding being the biggest barrier to these projects, can you talk a little bit more about like unique funds that you've used or not very often thought of funds? Somebody specifically has brought up like the BIA's like Tribal Transportation Program funds before. What unique funds have you guys kind of used and utilized in order to get these projects going?
Okay, I can answer that. So we are a branch. Transit is a branch under transportation. And I had mentioned that our transit program itself is on the original long range transportation plan. So our transportation and planning is generates their funding from BIA, direct BIA funds. So because we were listed on that tip um, list as far as construction goes, they were able to help. They meet our matches for the majority of our competitive grants. And then they were able to fund our parking lot, per se, and things like that. And so we've utilized BIA funds. So that we wouldn't probably have a nicest building if we didn't have the BIA funds. So yeah.
Completely fair. Warren, you got anything for us on that?
Not really. The difference between, like Michelle said, and we do have a couple transits in Montana, but for us, we are not under transportation. We are our own separate entity. And so we're able to pursue those dollars without having transportation inhibiting us in any way. So we're our own kind of independent department. And I know sometimes that can be beneficial and other times it may not. But we basically identified all the FTA funding and the MDT funding that we were available for. So, but yeah, we're just separate. So, but again, um, if you write your grant the right way, you'll have the money that you need. But you really need to know how much money you need and then a little bit more than that. So
So do you get direct funding through federal highways? Is that?
we don't. And
Oh,
so our transportation does. And so the problem is that transportation wants to do transportation things. And a lot of times transit, because the funding isn't where their funding's at, they tend to kind of not worry about transit.
mm,
And so that's why I'm glad that we're separate from them. And so he can't tell me what to do and vice versa. I can't tell him what to do. But we do have a great relationship. And so we are talking about building some bus stops with their funding that they have. So,
okay.
so
Yeah.
working together, I think we still have that same relationship. So
Awesome. Thank
Good.
you both so much. I'm going to open it up to Q&A from the audience here real quick. And specifically, I am going to call them out because without their need, this thing wouldn't have been organized. So, Jerome, if you have any questions, please feel free to come off mute and ask those questions here really quick. And then if anybody else has any questions, please drop them in the chat. We do only have 10 minutes left, however, and I do want some time for a little shameless plug towards the end. And so, Jerome, take it away.
Good morning. Um, I'm new to the capital projects and everything, so I got the funding and I'm at the RFP process. And so I know I got a template sent out for that to solicit for bids. So I know from what I gather is that I just put it out to the outlets like our tribal newspapers and out to the public. But how did you guys do it? Or like how did you
One of the first places that we sent our RFP notice out was the local newspaper in the classifieds. That was the where we could reach the, most people. And of course on the reservation and post offices and um, the local towns, but the classified is where we started.
okay. And then you talked about like being short on funds. You used uh your TTP funds to for the remainder of your cost on your building.
Us for Pyramid Lake, we used the TTP funds to fund some of the construction parts, like our pavement, like our roads.
Okay. Okay. And let's see. I think could I get your guys' contact number so if I ever have
Yeah,
any questions that I
yeah.
could, reach out because I agree with peer-to-peer exchange, that's where you can, get insight and, ideas on your build. And I think it's good also because that's where I met Ryan and Carrie was through conferences and everything. And so yeah, I really appreciate, doing this roundtable and that because it does give me insight and able to, get more contacts also, because like I said, this is my first capital project and I'm new to it. I'm excited about it. But
Well,
yeah,
congratulations.
I'm
Yeah.
sitting here like, what do I do next? Being able to reach out is a big thing also. So thank you guys and everything.
The only thing I would add is for me,
Mhm.
um, RFPs were really good for the mid 90s up to the 2000s because basically what you're focused on is the dollar bid. Low bid wins, right? And unfortunately for us, some of that construction has changed, and so you can't, while your focus it has to be on that dollar, you really need to focus on the qualifications, which is why we put out the RFQ. And so
Okay.
we were able to review all of their qualifications, and then what we were able to do um, is work with them on a negotiated price.
Okay.
So that way we were able to customize the bid more for our needs. And so we did the RFQ process with the architect and with the contractor. Because the advantage is once you have your architect in place, I know there is in the state of Montana, but there is what they call an architect exchange where they put it out throughout the whole state for all of the major contractors that are looking for those projects. So that is a big highlight once you get your architect in place. But I focused, like I said, on the qualifications rather than on price and proposal. So,
Okay. All
because
right.
low cost is not always,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you focus on a dollar, that's what you're going to get. So, so
Mm-hmm.
be careful with that.
Okay.
I'll say you stole
Thank
the
you.
words right out of my mouth, Warren. When I was at one of our local EDDs, we always like to say lowest and best because
Yeah.
lowest man might not be the best fit.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
might not be able to be bondable.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Another
Um,
thing that I can suggest for you, Jeremy, is to make sure that you have a project manual
Yep.
developed for your projects, because that's going to be your guideline
Yep.
for what you're in your checkoff list.
Yep.
That's another thing that FTA is requiring with your NEPA is there's a checkoff list
Yep.
that you have to go by.
Okay. Is there one available online or is there a place that I can
There
go?
might be a template, but I might be able to share ours with you. It's pretty extensive.
Okay.
And you'd have to make it, for your tribe.
Okay. Okay. That would be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
awesome.
if memory serves me right, there is a NEPA template out there
Yeah, there should be.
that I remember, and I think we just utilized that um, and then turn that in as our part of our documents.
Okay, I
Perfect.
think we would be okay with the NEPA part because we have a big old compound and it's within our motor pool department because I see oversee transit and motor pool
Yeah.
and I would be building it inside of the compound. So, and it's not, it's just, we're a real small, a small transit. So we have like five buses max, and
Mhm.
that's what I'm looking at.
That's what we have too. We have 5 buses.
Ryan, real quick, can you put our info out there so everybody would have it then, rather than just in the chat or?
Yeah, we should be able to share it out with people afterwards through the
Yeah,
registration emails. But if you
yeah,
could also drop your emails in the chat really quick, just so that
yeah.
people can grab them, that would be amazing. And while we do that, I would be remiss to not mention that part of the reason we're able to work with Jerome is that we here at NATO do TA in partnership with the Western Transportation Institute. And Mr. David Kack, somebody that we work very, very closely with on those projects, is here in the audience today. And I just wanted to see really quick if he had anything to add based on his transit experience and kind of the projects that he has seen in his role.
No, I think Michelle and Warren appreciate all your info. I think this goes back to Carrie talks about it often that, copy and steal everything and keep it simple. And I think the great thing about transit is that people are willing to share and there's resources out there. There's tribal transit systems and Michelle and Warren have talked about and others that have done these things. And I think the big thing is to rely on, as they said, your FTA liaisons, your state transit offices, and if you can find a rural transit system, a tribal transit system that's done this. The other thing is, um, you know, can you get plans or ideas from folks? Again, just saying to, Warren and Michelle, what were those costs? It gives you a point to kind of a reference of what are those costs when they're really done. We have what we think it's going to cost and what it actually costs. If you can see that difference, it just helps you too say, yeah, what do I think a system that can hold or a building that can hold 8 buses or 10 buses, what might that cost? So I think the networking is just super important to
Mhm.
talk to everyone you can who's built a building recently, and that's just going to help.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And with these last remaining 3 minutes, I just want to put one last call out there for questions. Does anybody else have questions for Michelle or Warren before I cut y'all loose? Going once? Going twice? All right, following Robert's Rules of Order, I see none. So let's give a big round of applause for both Michelle and Warren. Thank you guys so much for coming and sharing the information with us and for helping Jerome out and everybody else here that came to
Thank you
learn
for
from
having
y'all.
us. Thank you.
Of course. And yes, there is a survey opportunity from the Rural Public Transportation Initiative partnerships that we have just dropped there in the chat. And we'll be sending the recording out along with any other links that were shared here, as well as the emails for both Michelle and Warren out to everybody once everything is ready. So again, thank you all so much for coming to this Tribal Transit Peer Exchange put on here by NATO. And I'll talk to y'all later.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.
Have a good
Take
day.
care.
Bye-bye.